Welcome to WTF US, where we try to discuss issues that are affecting our country in a non-divisive way. This week, we're going to talk about inflation, which there's a lot of different views on what's causing it, and we're going to try to break it down as well as we can. Joining us in the studio is John, and he's our resident economist. He worked with Jefferson during the founding days of the Treasury.
I can't do this anymore. Right?
And we have Dirk, who is our retired USAF weapons controller and has some expertise on the economy, but will help us try to understand from his perspective. And Ariel, who is a physicist, and that somehow relates to economy in some way. Tali as well, she's been working, so she has some grasp. And I actually studied economics. I'm Rachel. I studied economics in college for about 3 years before I changed majors because economics is boring. But I did take a lot of classes in it before I switched, so I do have some understanding of it as well. And it is boring, so we'll try not to bore you. But our current situation in the country is kind of actually interesting. So let's get the show rolling. I think before we start talking about economy and inflation, we can just share our current thoughts about whatever. So does anyone have any interesting news from the week?
I voted.
This
Me
is
too.
nice.
Ooh, you too vote?
Ooh.
I
You didn't vote? Or you
Oh,
did Julius Caesar Brutus impression?
no, in Nevada, I did not vote in Nevada, and Barbara Sagabsky lost her primary. And if you don't know who she is, Babs was, or still is, Secretary of State for Nevada. And she's a Republican, and she's really great. And she lost her primary because she refused to stop counting mail-in ballots for Trump. Not mail-in ballots for Trump, but Trump
Might have been
wanted her
against Trump, but yeah.
Right.
to quit counting mail-in ballots, and she refused, and so she lost her primary to the biggest tool I have ever had the displeasure of interviewing or knowing
Was that Bob Beers?
in normal life. I'm sorry?
Wow.
I said, was that Bob Beers?
No.
Considering
fool
all
not
the
to vote
people
for
that you've interviewed and known, that's actually scary.
Yeah.
yeah, that must be.
Oh yeah, I used to interview like child rapists and yeah, just really, really scary people. And like, yeah, he is pretty awful.
This guy's a Trump supporter, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, of course he is. And I'm trying to think of his name right now. I don't know why I can't think of his name.
Just we'll call him Giant Tool number one.
But
Jim Marchant. Jim Marchant.
Yeah.
He makes like
I actually think that's a good thing, that all of these people that Trump is backing, not all, but some of them are winning their primaries, because I think
he's not necessarily worse than other people that I've interviewed. Like, I don't really know his personal life or anything. He just comes off so smarmy, like this weird, like Southern politician with like a Mississippi kind of accent going on.
I love smarm.
There's a lot of smarm going
Right up there with
on.
Nutella.
And like I've been acquainted with this man for many years when he was like running for small time things and always losing, and it was just kind of a joke. And then he ended up on city council in Las Vegas, and like he was making national news because this video was just so like laughable, and like it was funny because our city council was a bunch of women, and so they were discussing the pink tax, and he cut in with what he thought was just this really hilarious joke. He says,
Tax on menstrual
on
equipment.
feminine products,
Oh,
also
Damn.
also diapers, things that women buy.
Weird.
And so he cut in with this hilarious joke of, well, what about my jock straps? You might think that that's not a necessity, but I really need my jock straps. And he thought everybody was going to crack up, and he doesn't realize, like, he's sitting on city council with a bunch of women, and it was just dead silent. And so this video kind of made the rounds because it was
And
pretty
well,
funny.
it should have.
And
Well, hopefully
But
that guy won't get
Yeah, it
elected.
should have.
Why do you think it's good, John?
What's that? What do
You
I
said
think
you
it's
thought
good?
it was good. Yeah. Why
Oh.
do you think it's good that these Trumpies are getting winning their primaries?
Well, because statistically, there are more Democrats in the country than there are Republicans. And if they turn out to vote, they're voting against Trump. You follow me?
Right.
And there
And
are a
he-
lot of, and with, as a result of the hearings, the January 6th committee hearings, these last week or so, a lot of people, I mean, all of the witnesses that they've had up there have been Republican Trump supporters. You know, his daughter threw him under the bus. So, you know, I think a lot of people are going, oh, okay, well, you know, Trump likes him, fuck that guy. You know, I'm going to either not vote or I'll vote Democratic. So,
I understand the
Yeah.
logic, and I'm not necessarily going to disagree, but I will say this, that I'm not happy about it at all, because that shows me that there's still people that are either stupid enough or uninformed enough or don't care enough that will vote for somebody who is clearly not suited for public office, but they still want them. They don't care if they get in.
but that's
And it
why
only
it's
takes a
important.
few.
That's why it's important, because these people are identifying themselves. Right?
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like they are identifying themselves, but also a lot of these primaries happened before these trials, before the January 6th trials, the hearings, right? And so it's been like these past couple weeks, maybe, that it's been happening, or maybe just 1.5 weeks
2
since it
weeks,
started, 2 weeks. And I think, so there's some people that are in the Trump cult, so they're sort of just like cultists, and
Right.
regardless of what information they see, they're never going to be just, you know, they're never going to think any wrong of him. But then I think there's a lot of like in between Republicans that are starting to hopefully like wake up and smell the coffee, and they're like, oh wow, all these other Republicans, like everyone's jumping ship because they realize the ship's going down. And I've been waiting for the ship to go down for years. And I just think it's like, you know, when you have everyone coming out to say specifically how they planned on cheating, how they coerced people at a variety different levels of the government, including the vice president, to cheat with them, and how they really, like, you know, they kept nailing it. And I think it's important to nail it as like the thing that makes America America, whether you want to vote for Trump or whether you want to vote for anyone else, is that you can vote. And the, you know, whatever state you're in, all your votes will go to one candidate or another with the electors. And if that gets thrown out, then we don't have a democracy. We don't have America anymore. And if you love America and you're gung-ho USA and you want whatever the hell you want, you still have to like respect the sanctity of having a right to vote and having that vote be somewhat represented by electors. I mean, it's not perfect, but
And that's
at
why
least
it's so disturbing to me that this particular woman lost for Secretary of State, because she did her job like she was supposed to. She's a Republican, and she still lost to this tool. And it's disturbing to me.
that people are doubling down.
But it should be, and that's the point, because with the general election coming up in November, right? And you've got all of these idiots that have now are going to be representing the Republican Party, and the more we see with what's coming out in the hearings, and then I mean, from everything that I've seen, it looks like the DOJ is on the cusp of starting to file charges and you know, hauling some people in.
The
So
problem is, I agree with you, but the problem is that
there's too many
if I
stupid
haven't,
people.
if I haven't learned anything else over the last 4 or 5 years is that there are so many fucking idiots out there that are willing to vote for somebody who should not be in office, that, you know, we're sitting here like on a wing and a prayer, hoping that the Democrats or at least intelligent Republicans are going to come out and they're going to vote the right way, but we don't know. It's a
That's up
crapshoot.
to us, man.
But it's still a crapshoot.
Banging
So,
on people's heads to get them out there to vote.
hoping that these guys, just because they're winning now, does not translate into, oh, well, people's going to see all this other stuff and they're going to say, oh, we got to get rid of them. That may not be the case.
No, I know.
So
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's so disappointing. Like, she was very competent. She did her job. The previous Secretary of State was Ross Miller, who was Democrat, and his office was a mess. And so, I mean, I think that nobody really had a problem voting for Barbara Zagapsky up until this. Like, I don't think Democrats had a problem. Republicans
Well, those people have been painted as the enemy. Like, you know, if you're for the Trump party, all the people that refuse to break the law, pretty much, like
Right.
look at Liz Cheney. You know, it's like these people who are the top politicians in the federal government
And her
have
father
been
is Darth
ousted
Vader.
by their own party because they refuse to break the law.
Right.
And so
It's just disappointing when you've got somebody really trustworthy, and that's why
well, I wonder, like,
they're.
what is it about, what did you call them?
Stupid
Shysters,
people.
something, schmoozles,
Oh,
smears, something, I don't know.
Smarmy.
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 Yeah,
Yes,
smarmy
smarmy.
people. And people are like watching their bullshit commercial being like, ooh, I love that smarmy person. It's like, is there something broken in people where they're attracted to smarmy people? Or do they
It's really weird because I feel like in the deep South it might like.
do they identify with the smart? And they're like,
But-
ooh, I'm smarmy too. I'm smarmy too. This makes me feel better. I'll vote for someone who's smarmy too. Like, I don't quite get
because when you look at the, obviously it depends on how you define it, but when you look at the definition of what smarmy actually is, there's certain aspects of the personality that would appeal to a certain type of person. Because one of those things with smarmy people, super confident, they give the impression of being super smart, you know, like they really know what they're doing.
Oh, this,
And-
I mean, Jim Marchant does not come across as an intelligent person by any stretch of the imagination.
But he does come across as confident, I assume.
Here goes. Excessively irritating or insincerely earnest or unctuous, relating to or indulging in lewd conduct, smutty, or falsely earnest, smug, or ingratiating.
So the definition of a politician.
The definition of smarmy.
Exactly. Right on the nose there, buddy. Yeah.
And speaking of
And a lot of
politicians,
people really like that shit. I mean, they look at that and go, oh, look at that guy.
Or I think part of it, maybe the Trump thing is like all these other guys looking all clean and upright. Deep down, they're smarmy. So let's pick these people that are at least openly smarmy, like Trump, because at least they're not lying about it. At least they're sincere about being smarmy and they're not trying to hide it. Maybe that's part of it.
Well, let's also not forget another elephant in the room, which is there's still a lot of misogyny in politics. And so just the fact that a man is running against a woman as far as Republicans are concerned, that's a lot of reason for a lot of Republicans to vote for the guy.
The U.S. is so far behind in that regard.
Yeah.
We are way behind the curve.
I
got a
agree.
third
Did you
eye
guys?
rainbow. Just putting that out.
I saw a thing with Angela. I mean, not Angela. I'm sorry. Michelle Wolf was doing a stand-up thing on Netflix, and she was talking about that, and it was hilarious. She was talking about how American people are having this difficulty voting for a woman, and she says, "Yeah, because I can understand why we wouldn't really have a grasp on that, even though everybody else in the world has done it." And she's naming Myanmar and all these other countries.
Indira Gandhi.
Yeah, some of these countries that are even totalitarian governments, even they voted for women and had them elected to office. And we haven't done it yet. We have a hard time doing that, to get a woman as the leader of our country, like getting a woman as the vice president of the country is like a big deal. It's like all these other countries that voted women to run their countries, and it ain't a big deal.
New Zealand.
I mean, we're also still using feet and inches, but in our defense, so is Liberia. So, we're in good company.
And so here's my theory along that line, right? On the whole, and I know this is a huge generalization, and
On the whole.
I mean, yeah, we got some caulk for that, so. So, it has been my experience that reasonably intelligent women, right? And I'm talking about if they made it through high school.
Like Tolly and I. Oh, wait, she didn't quite make it. No, you did make it. Yeah, like Tolly and I.
Right.
Unlike
I'm
some
the first one to graduate high school in my family. The only one.
So they are very good with finances. I mean, they really are. I mean, if you stop and think about it, you take a 25-year-old guy and a 25-year-old woman. Now, in today's day and age, that really doesn't work because everybody's fucked. But, it's like, okay, so, maybe 10, 15 years ago, a 25-year-old woman probably had her own job, her own house, had a car that was paid for, and a 25-year-old guy is still hanging out at the bar playing video games. So,
And living in his parents' basement.
yeah. So, voting for women is how we're going to solve inflation.
And I
Yeah,
think
except
there's
as like Marjorie Taylor Greene type women are like nuts. Also, so like not all women,
No,
But
not
I think
all.
if we didn't have to like I think if women in office didn't have to pander to only men as coworkers,
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know.
Anyway, that was supposed to be a transition into our subject today.
So yeah, so give me a subject. We'll talk about cool
do
women,
I get
Janet
my
Yellen.
fluff for the week?
Oh, Ariel, you
Get
want
your what?
fluff?
He wants to give his fluff for the week.
Okay,
It's quick fluff.
fluff it up.
In the UK, rats are being trained with tiny backpacks to go through rubble and find and communicate with disaster victims. Not political. I just think it's cool.
That's cool. Thanks for
I don't
fluffing.
know whether I'm more impressed that it's the rats or the fact that they actually have fucking backpacks.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to have like the the
Transmitter.
microphone in there, so they
Transmitter
can
and microphone,
rescue
yeah.
workers.
Yeah.
Little tiny bottles of water.
Maybe like a little tiny joint or something.
Well, now that we're employing them to help people, maybe we'll stop doing
Here,
all this.
smoke this
weird
while they're
chemical
waiting to
research
dig
on
you
them.
out.
Nah. I don't know if we're that compassionate.
Yeah,
Rats love chemicals.
we're pimping rats, but
No,
guess
no,
just
they
get
did
going.
the studies where they had the rats and they had a choice between the water and the water that was laced with
Cocaine.
with the cocaine,
Right.
And they chose the regular water as long as they had other rats there they could play and hang out with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
as
a
long as they-
fascinating study, which basically, was used to illustrate the point of, what is it, that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's community.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that,
Yeah, that was a great.
and it
But
and it makes
cocaine is a party drug.
yeah, but it makes a lot of sense,
but it's not a sustainable
It's
party drug.
Yeah.
right?
The party must end.
But when you think about it, though, two things. First of all, almost everybody that I know that has addiction issues has that in their background. That lack of community growing up or at the current time. And the second thing is, if you think about those parties that you go to, a lot of those people that are there, even though they look all happy and whatever, they got the same issues. So it makes sense.
a lot of them are probably using cocaine to overcome those issues.
Exact. That's my point. Yes.
Speaking of parties, my dog's quinceañera is on the 9th, and you guys are invited.
Did you get him a fancy dress?
She has a tiara.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Okay, her.
Anyway,
Sure, you get like the tuba, the mariachi band with the big wraparound tuba. It makes the party better. We know because our neighbors are both Mexican, and the tuba is really what rocks the party.
I'll keep that in mind.
And shakes the windows and stuff,
On with the inflation.
All
Yeah,
right,
I was going to
so-
say that's the perfect segue into the inflation.
Right?
Yeah, because there
It's
isn't as
becoming
much
more
candy
and
in the
more
pinatas
difficult
as there
to
used to be.
afford a good quinceanera.
Exactly, and this is why. So there's kind of, in doing research for this, it was interesting because there's a lot of, as always, like propaganda out there on a lot of different sources for like what's the cause of inflation. And so the propaganda side of inflation is that it's all the president's fault. It's all because they've slowed down oil production. It's all because they printed money for the stimulus, like this. So that's one side of why people think there's inflation. And that side is being pushed really heavily by super far right media. And so and those, when I looked up those sources, because I read both sides of this, it was like, wow, most of these sources are highly opinionated and non-factual. So then I tried to get information a little bit more deeply, like what are the real causes of inflation that we're experiencing right now? And for people that don't know, inflation is when it takes, it requires more money to buy the same thing. So the value of the money is less and the price of the goods is more. And there's potential causes for it. So the actual causes for it that I found are partly in part of supply and demand economics, which is like not enough supply to meet the demand. And so prices go up. And that's a real thing, like, higher shipping costs, that's part of it. But the real part of it, and printing money and giving people money to buy things increase the amount of people's ability to buy. And then there's less things, which is a very small part of it. But the very big part of it is, surprise, unchecked corporate greed. And we can talk about why that is. And we can really go into, especially like gas prices and the war and all these things. But I have a lot to say about it, but I think we all do. And John also understands some things about it. And Ariel has really done a lot of research in figuring out part of this limited supply of goods, which is something we actually, in terms of our food security worldwide, have to worry about as people are starving to death because of it. So I don't know who'd like to chat about it first, but we can start our chat. John, Ariel, any volunteers?
I'd love.
John,
Go ahead.
all right.
No, go. Ariel, go. Because
Okay,
I'm only
I'm gonna
going to
highlight
take
our
about
view.
45 minutes, so.
All right. I wanted to talk about food stuff because I like food. I eat food almost every day. I'm a big fan of it, and it seems like without food, people tend to die of starvation. Currently,
I've heard those rumors.
This
pretty
is
common.
what I hear. Last year, this was happening at a rate of about 1 every 5 seconds. So about 25,000 people die per day of hunger, according to the UN. There was recently a meeting of the UN Security Council to basically discuss the impending global food crisis, which is something that we should really be looking at. According to Sarah Menker, who's CEO of Grow Intelligence, which is a company that uses AI to look at food trends, we've got currently a 10-week supply globally of wheat. We've got unstable land
No more
use,
cookies.
which means no more cookies. We've got long-term unstable land use, water depletion, soil erosion, water scarcity, and disruption of biological cycles contributing to this. The UN estimates in the last year, food prices have gone up a third, fertilizer up more than half, and oil prices up more than 2/3. In the US, consumer prices in April were up 8.3% from the previous year. Food costs were up 9.4%. Stuff like meat,
Inflation.
poultry, fish, and eggs up 14% from last year. In China, vegetable prices are up a quarter, 24%. 49 million people are already knocking on famine's door, which is a big deal.
Seems like more. It should be more, right?
It's about to be significantly more.
What is it?
49 million people in 43 countries are considered to be knocking on famine's door currently.
Which means they can't get enough food to eat and are sacrificing food that they're eating in order to feed their children.
In Sri Lanka, rising inflation has led to emergencies, extreme food shortages. Afghanistan has been close to famine for months. Lebanon has been in an economic crisis for over a year. The UN food chief, David Beasley, warned that the war in Ukraine could add 47 million people to the 276 million people that are marching towards starvation, or were already marching towards starvation before the Russian invasion.
Yeah, so it seems like if it's 274 people about to starve, that 49 million people knocking on famine's door isn't, you know what I mean? I feel like there's got to be much more.
Yeah, so I mean, he was saying that 276 million were already marching towards starvation, and now because of the war, we've got another 47 million added to that.
Gotcha.
We're seeing protests.
So that's the entire population of our country. In the world is starving, about to be starving.
We're seeing protests in places like Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Peru, destabilization from Sahel to Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad. According to this UN food chief, these are only signs of things to come. Pakistanis have also been asked to do the unthinkable and cut back on tea, which just seems brutal to me.
I mean, I listened to a thing on the radio the other day about East Africa, and the starvation there is like particularly horrible because they get their wheat from Ukraine, and that there's like four people dying, or a person dying every 4 seconds from starvation, which was like horrible.
So in looking at what to do about this, what's contributing to it, I thought it would be interesting to look at domestic policy, international policy, and then kind of where the two meet. So domestically would not necessarily mean the US, but internal management of a country. We've got a really good example of Indonesia, which is the world's biggest palm oil producer, makes 60% and exports 53% of the world's supply. Obviously, a lot of people know that palm oil has a huge detrimental environmental impact, is one of the main reasons orangutans are going extinct. Setting that aside for the moment, it's the cheapest oil in the world. A lot of people rely on it as their primary cooking oil. Last year, the prices spiked. This led to a lot of people panicking.
They mentioned that those people are gross.
What?
Nothing.
Would you say that they're gross? Is that what you said?
Indonesians?
I love Indonesians.
No. When people cook with coconut oil.
Oh, it's not coconut. It's actually
Palm
from
oil.
the heart of the tree. So they have to, I mean, it's also like kind of a bad thing because they have to kill the tree to get
It's
the
sap.
palm oil.
So, yeah,
It's sap? Anyway.
It's not
continue.
coconut, just so you know.
yeah, it's not coconuts. It's not.
They do use a lot of coconuts, but
So basically, last year, palm oil prices shot up. This led to a lot of panicking and panic buying, which caused them to shoot up more. The government stepped in to try to deal with this because a lot of people rely on it. So they forced exporters to sell a certain percentage of their oil domestically and also fixed the prices at a certain low rate. That price fixing ultimately led to more panic or more hoarding, basically, because then all of a sudden people could afford it. This led to shelves going empty.
so then you need to like ration it and prevent.
So
Right.
yeah, so then eventually it was gone, then brought back at double the prices that it was at before. And on April 28th, the export of palm oil was banned overnight. Immediately, the prices jumped 6%. This sort of rippled across the market. Soy went up 4.5%. The next day, the ban was reversed, and then reversed again.
This is what not to do, maybe?
Then banning all cooking oil. Right. So ultimately, there was a question of what caused this spike in the first place. There was a probe and basically found criminal activity on the part of the palm oil monopolies who were fixing the prices.
And that's exactly what's happening here. Like,
So that combined with fear, panic buying, and locking things down in an isolationist manner really exacerbated the whole situation, and the effects of that have been rippling worldwide. Palm oil is the cheapest oil, so this disproportionately affects the poor. As far as cooking oils, palm makes up 36%, soy 11%, and sunflower 9%.
So if you want to fry your food, like you're not, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not even good for you. So maybe this means we should be less dependent on
Get an air
palm
fryer.
oil.
that means shifting. So as people are trying to be less dependent on palm
They're trying
oil,
to buy other stuff.
Oh, and part of this also is because Indonesia has been trying to get off of foreign oils. They've been using their palm oil as well as China to make biofuel, which is laudable, but this has exacerbated the issue.
Right.
But South America is about to have the lowest soybean harvest in 6 years. Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay are down 9%. So basically that means that whatever people are trying to shift to is also going up in price.
So like in terms of
Then
how that affects, you know, like this micro example of like how other markets are behaving like this, is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, we're seeing examples as far as the domestic policy of the Indonesian government not properly limiting activity or of these palm oil cartels, and then also mismanagement as far as fixing the prices in a way that led to hoarding rather than subsidizing the people who are needing, the poor people who are needing to buy the oil in a way that would allow the prices to remain high and lead to market feedback that would eventually drop the prices.
Interesting.
So that's domestic. Then international, we have the obvious war in Ukraine.
Leading to the food shortage.
Right. So I mentioned that sunflower oil is big behind palm. Ukraine and Russia make most of this. Ukraine and Russia produce 25% of the food oil globally. 75% of global sunflower oil exports have been lost due to the war in Ukraine. Russia, Ukraine, and Indonesia produce 46% of the world's cooking oil. Currently, all of the ports in Ukraine are closed. Russia has cut off natural gas to Poland and to Bulgaria. Europe has banned 2/3 of its oil imports from Russia and is planning on banning 90% by the end of this year. This is basically...
I think I have too many numbers in my head now. I can't follow.
Okay.
What's the point?
The point is fertilizer. The point, we primarily, the EU uses natural gas to create ammonium nitrate fertilizer, which is used to grow crops. In addition, prices for Russian fertilizer have soared 300%. So this is a huge issue. There are biofertilizers, and there's a Norwegian firm looking at using solar to make fertilizer through hydrolysis.
So we can't keep growing food right now in the way that we used to because of fertilizer costs.
In addition, Ukraine is Europe's breadbasket. So this is affecting things pretty hugely.
And so there's just going to be a longstanding food crisis indefinitely.
And we also have global warming affecting things, creating droughts worldwide, which is affecting things as well pretty heavily. So we've got mismanagement of corporations, unchecked monopolies, corporate greed, war, and global warming. Basically, people not having respect for each other and the planet, that's driving prices up all over the place. And sort of isolationism and panic, which is exacerbating the situation.
I'm glad you summed it up like that, because I've been thinking this whole time you were talking about that almost every ill that has befell this planet in probably the last century or even more is all brought upon us by unchecked capitalism. It's just ridiculous that not only have they created all these different situations where you have inflation and all these up and down things and stuff like that, but they've also created all the ecological disasters that lead to all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Droughts and pollution of the water, pollution of the air. It's just fucking ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I feel like
I mean, even before the war, wheat prices had already risen 80% in the last year.
So if we were to quit frying things and go gluten-free for a minute.
That's like a privileged thing
Well,
to do.
I think that
Yeah, that's,
gluten-free, I mean, it takes 14 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of meat.
Right.
So going gluten-free would not ultimately be the
Fish.
way to reduce our grain consumption. But because so many things are being hit, it's ultimately just sort of like I mean, you're good as long as you don't need to eat anything, I think.
It's
But
like we
just
kind of have to buckle down and
I eat a lot of fish.
I mean, like, so the oceans are overfished. So it's kind of like, okay, where are people overeating, eating unnecessarily? Privileged people are always going to have access to things they want, and poor people are really going to suffer. And no one's going to be held accountable unless governments and like really unless governments regulate corporate greed. That's like the huge problem.
Well, yeah, because
and
we
I'm totally down
basically
to talk about
have
that.
you basically have this ridiculous circular logic that goes on because the bottom line is if poor people are not getting the stuff that they need to get, the government doesn't give a fuck because they don't vote anyway.
I mean, in May, like, you know, just a month ago, our House of Representatives passed a price gouging prevention act for gasoline prices. The Democrats voted yes. And all Republicans and 4 Democrats voted no. And so it passed the House. But the bill pretty much said that it was unlawful and unconscionably excessive. That these prices that they were pretty much price gouging, and that they needed to regulate fuel prices because the oil industry is owned by a monopoly. It's, you know, they can price gouge, they can collaborate.
Collaborate.
collaborate. Yeah.
Corroborate, that one. They can cooperate and decide when they're all going to move their prices together. And I mean, it's kind of insane, but the amount of money that they've made from their
Price gouging greed.
price gouging, yeah, and from you know, pretty much they're saying just for their shareholders, it's like those companies were asked, why aren't you producing enough oil? Is it because because you don't have enough option? And 59% of oil companies said they were under pressure from their investors to keep pulling in record profits. Only 6% of oil companies blamed government regulations for not increasing production. So it's like these huge companies are giving record profits to their shareholders, and it's, you know, it's not just oil, it's food, it's soda, it's everything it's pretty much everything that we buy is owned by monopolies for the most part, and they're setting the prices. And in order to do something about it, we really need to have more government regulation, which people don't like that sound, but it's like that's the only thing that can keep this greed in check.
But half of the people in Congress are benefiting from this. I mean, that's what the right-wing Republicans are ecstatic about this because it makes their case. Look what the Democrats are doing. Look what's happened to our economy. You got to put us back in office. So once we get in power, and then they don't do shit except give tax breaks to the same people who caused this. And
Biden opened up like land leases. He's produced more oil in his term. You know, production of crude oil during his term was higher than in Trump's first year. Biden has issued more federal permits to drill on federal land. You know, and of the permits that are existing, not even all of them are being used. So oil companies aren't even using the permits that they have, and they're using this to point this figure and say, oh, the Democrats, oh, the Biden administration. You know, we only get 2% of our oil from Russia in the first place. That's not what's driving up our oil prices.
Right.
It is fully corporate greed and price gouging. You know, they've actually done things to try to, you know, to put more oil into the supply, do all these things. And the oil companies are like, we don't even care if there's more oil in the supply because we're just going to keep the prices what they are because we can. And our shareholders want to be reeling in these record profits. We're putting billions and billions of dollars in people's stock portfolios while these oil companies are buying back their own shares to continue putting money into their own industry. and nothing's being done about it.
Well, because half of the people there that could vote for it are benefiting from this. So
Do you think it's only half?
I'm just saying,
Yeah, it's probably more than half.
maybe it's 4.973% or something like that, but it's like the votes that are needed, like you said, not one Republican voted for that windfall tax gouging thing. Not one.
For the oil, yeah.
And because the money that they get from the oil companies for their campaigns and the benefits that they get from these people, why are they going to give that away? They want to remain in power, and it makes the Democrats look bad. So, and if you're talking about gas prices, what that does is that also makes it more expensive to get products to market. So if a trucker is
It
now
certainly
spending 30, 40, 50% more for fuel to get things from point A to point B, it's going to be tougher to do that. And that makes the price of the stuff that ends up in our store shelves higher because the cost to get it there is higher. And
what I'd like to see is a study. You don't really need to do a study, but if you were to look at the largest industries that we have in this country, probably the world, if you look at the largest monopolies we have in this country, and you look and see what the correlation is between them and the amount of lobbyists that they have in Washington, D.C., you pretty much figure out everything that you need to know about the situation.
Follow the
If every large industry in this country has no corporate competition anymore. I mean, Wall Street, our government's consolidated into 5 giant banks. Airlines used to be 12, now there's 4. They control 80% of domestic flights and domestic prices. Cable, we have 3 major companies where you can get your cell phone or your internet. We have not many companies who you can get your power from, power, like electricity power. Drug companies control the pharmaceutical industry, like Procter and Gamble are hugely tied into the commercial body care product industry, and Coca-Cola and Pepsi are all raise their prices at the same time because they know that they can. And it's these huge corporations where their shareholders are saying, we want money, we want to keep making these record profits, and record profits and continually increasing profit isn't a sustainable model for life on Earth.
Well,
nothing just grows and grows and grows unchecked. That's what cancer is. Cancer is unchecked growth that dominates the host and kills it.
And the funny thing about it is that the stock market and all that other shit is stuff that was basically designed for rich people to play with money and make more money off of.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. I mean, the solution to this, which I feel like is really needs to happen, is a broad antitrust law that we should have. We have had them in the past, and they've been stripped away by Republicans. Not to say that, not to blame Republicans, but they haven't always been this way. But since the 80s, they've been anti-regulation, and they've been trying to put more money into corporations. And I get, okay, you had your heyday these past, I'm 40 years old. The past 40 years of my life, they've been stripping away rights and regulations and putting more and more money in the hands of corporations. And now, enough is enough. Now you're all filthy rich. You have more money than you could do with in 10 generations. It's got to bounce back. There's got to be an ebb and a flow of this greed, or else people are just starving to death and no one can afford to live.
They're waiting for it to trickle down.
Be so imbalanced. And the supply chain, and I could talk about this just for a minute, but in terms of debt and debt and the money that people have, it's kind of crazy, but it's the average household human beings in America have $6,000 in savings, and that includes the richest people in those statistics. So if the average person has $6,000 and you take out the richest people, actually that turns into the average American has $90,000 of debt. So most of us are in the hole. Like most of us are incredibly in debt. We're living on borrowed money. The people that have the most have an incredible amount. And the idea, like I think you said, Dirk, is like, or maybe Ariel also said, it's like, how do you lower the prices, people hoard, you increase the supply and lower the prices, then maybe people don't hoard as much, or there's going to be a balance, right? And the Fed, we were going to talk about this too. The Fed is going to change the interest rate, so it's harder for people. It's less lucrative to borrow money, and that usually shifts inflation, but it takes an amount of time. But the idea that like people can't afford to live or eat needs to be addressed right away, and it's like things like the stimulus, which pumped money into the economy. The amount of money that people got compared to the amount of money that exists is so minuscule. Like 90% of the money that exists isn't even in circulation because it's being held in corporate accounts and it will never become in the system again. People are just using it to make more money by taking loans on it. And, that money is out of circulation. So because, based on the amount of money that's in circulation that people are squabbling over, it's almost nothing. So it's like we need to do something to help people with like the immediate emergency, which is going to be figuring out how to eat. And it's not going to go away. Like food shortages based on this kind of thing and global warming and not being able to grow food where we used to grow are only going to get worse.
So what happens to all of these businesses and corporations when the consumer can no longer consume?
But the consumer needs.
And I mean, don't confuse the stock market with the economy, because they're two different things. The economy thrives when the middle class has money and spends it. When you and I have a few extra bucks in our pocket, we go out to dinner or we buy the kids shoes or something like that. And if you're filthy rich, you're putting it in offshore accounts, or you're playing with paper money to buy something else, just to make more money and not contributing to the economy itself. So if
this isn't even coming down to luxury. This is coming down to like people
survival.
need to drive to go to work.
Yeah.
They need to eat to survive. And so regardless of whether or not they can afford it, they're going to do everything they can to pay whatever price it is because they need it. These are like basic needs. So it's like, you can put off shoes, you can put off clothes, like, for a little while, but the things that people actually need.
I'll put off my clothes.
Yeah, so the things that people don't need, like luxury stuff, like maybe like cell phones, maybe internet subscription, like at some point, people are going to have to choose, can I drive to work and can I eat? Or all these other kind of luxury items, do I even need those things? And so, but as long as people need stuff, the basic stuff, and the corporations are price gouging that basic stuff, it just makes people poorer and poorer and poorer until they're on the brink of starvation. Yeah, and dead people can't buy things.
Right.
I feel ya.
And that's when those people start eating the rich.
I do think that we should just have like a almost Hunger Games style like raffle every year, where we just like every year we devour one Fortune 500 company and just split the profits amongst the people.
Just one?
I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking I don't want Hunger Games with just regular people. I want the rich people
right.
in it.
I was thinking
we
more
just-
Jonathan Swift kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That maybe that's why they're limiting abortion, because they're gonna soon realize that poor people are gonna have to eat their own babies.
Yeah. Damn,
And-
girl.
and-
that's
and-
that's
I know-
world class cynicism
I know that
right
you
there.
said that tongue in cheek, but that could be a serious possibility.
No, that's world class cynicism. That actually hurt, because there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
This is just fucking insane that we have allowed them to influence our politicians. Rich people have influenced our politicians in such a way that you have companies like, what's it, Coca-Cola, that now owns rights to water, fucking water.
Nestle.
Yeah.
Nestle.
Are you fucking kidding me? You got to pay for water?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
mean, we already have to pay for water. It's
Well, yeah, but I know there's a difference between you're paying for the water coming out of the lake or the river
You're
or
paying for
whatever
getting the
to
water
go
to
to
you.
the city.
Right.
You know, I understand that, but
Like this year, PepsiCo made $3 billion in operating profits and increased their profit margin 28.9%.
wow.
I remember
All these companies are profiting so much off of everybody just needing to keep buying their shit, and they're just not checked by anyone.
The highest profit rates in 40 years.
And like where you
These
say the
companies.
stock market isn't the economy, John, but it's like people who have money invested in these companies and have enough money to not be poor, to be able to have investments. People that have investments keep making more money, and people that are poor don't have investments, and there's no way for them to make money off like this. This is actually literal people who have stock portfolios are making money off of poor people starving.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and like you have to look at, you know, I have a stock portfolio. My parents have one, and at some point, it's like, do you feel okay that you keep getting richer, even a little wealthier, when this is what's happening to people?
But the sad part about it is what you said earlier. It's not fucking sustainable. So all these poor people are dying off, but eventually that means that all you people that were making all this money, you're going to end up being further down on the bottom, and you're going to be the next person in the cycle. They don't fucking get that. It cannot sustain itself. Eventually there's going to be a whole bunch of very few really rich people, and there's going to be a planet that's basically devastated, and a bunch of people either dying or soon to die.
And I don't say this lightly, Dirk, either. Like, but I think it's just like, how much can you make all the poor people on Earth slaves to that little bit of money that they're getting from their job, and like wholly dependent on a situation that's never supporting them, and like there's no joy in life at that point when you are just working to live and you have no other choice, you know?
Mad Max.
Yeah, they're basically putting it down to one of three outcomes. Either all the poor people end up being slaves and they end up dying off, and so you have to come up with another steady supply of slaves, which is the people that, you know,
That aren't quite as rich
yeah.
as the richer ones.
Or all those people that you're trying to make slaves end up rising up and killing all these other all the rich people, or basically the system kind of just muddles on like it is, and eventually the whole planet dies.
And on that note,
it's not going to take long. I mean, you know, with Ariel talking about his like food shortages, you know, it's like, it's not going to take long before we already don't have enough food in the right places. So it's like, well, some people have like a 21 course meal and a spread of caviar, and they're throwing food in the trash, like people are dying every minute.
Right.
So
Well, when you really pay attention to what Ariel said, you know, basically what we're talking about is not just a global disaster being created, but it's exponentially going on as the years go by, because you can't just have it it's just a little bit here, and then next year it's a little bit more, and then next year it's a little bit more. It actually goes in exponential. Doubles and triples.
Yep.
And I'm telling you, man,
it's the old, if you tell two people and they tell two people and they tell two people, you know, before you know it, we have the entire.
This is one of those situations where you get to the point where you realize that if you wait another 10 or 15 years on this planet, you may not be able to stop it.
Yeah.
And I think it all goes back to kind of a key respect for diversity, whether it be, you know, countries, whether it be corporations as far as limiting monopoly, or whether it be just the planet and respect for each other and the other species.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And, you know, you, especially when the more we have these shortages and whatnot, we get this scarcity mentality, and that leads to fear and isolationism that just further complicates things. I mean, we see how Indonesia closing off their exports rippled across the world. 22 countries have prohibited 10% of their food trade. India just limited sugar exports on May 24th. So places are already starting to shut down, and every time this does, and then it sends ripples and just exacerbates the whole situation rather than remembering that we're part of an interconnected web, and that is as it should be, and that interconnection and that diversity allows for systems to compensate when one element goes down.
Well, it's so interesting. It's like this corporate isolation, like corporate consolidation has led to like, then people also begin to like isolate and grab onto the resources that they have. I mean, if you look at like what led up into the Depression, like the Great Depression in America, and like what ended up happening at some point, you know, like it kind of reminds me at the beginning of the pandemic when people were in those long food lines. At some point, people get to the point where there's like, I'm already the lowest I could be. I couldn't lose anything else. They realize their neighbors also are in the same boat, and they're like, what the fuck? We all need to stand up together and take our house. Like, why are we letting the banks take our houses? Why are we letting them set the prices? Like, screw them all. We all need to get together and do something about this because we're all finally destitute and we can all see it.
And
You know,
don't
and
let
I don't want it to get there,
corporations
but
buy houses.
Unless
So for
you're-
the first time now, we've actually reached the point where we've reached the same wealth disparity as we had in the Gilded Age, which actually made me kind of laugh, but like in a sad way. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual fundraiser for the Costume Institute, their theme this year was the Gilded Age. And so we all got to watch a bunch of famous people dress up like the Gilded Age and be sad. But people are still talking about this because apparently the Kardashians didn't understand what the Gilded Age was and thought it was the 1960s. So
What is the Gilded Age?
the Gilded Age was 1800s, like when the railroads were being built and everything.
Gotcha.
Just yeah.
So Kim Kardashian wore Marilyn Monroe's "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" dress, and Chris wore dressed up as Jackie, and it was ridiculous. And apparently Kim destroyed the dress, and people have been complaining about this. But somebody put out a tweet this week that made me really laugh. It was I don't care if Kim destroyed Marilyn's dress. I'll never own a home.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's like,
Yes.
you know, at some point when you're starving and you can't, like you're working so hard, you can't even watch the news or pay for your cable subscription. Like who gives a shit what celebrities are doing? Like, I need to survive. And like, there should be joy in life.
Yeah, no, there was just something sad about watching these people dress up like it's the Gilded Age, because it is again, and we're all watching.
Well,
You say everyone
one last
will
note,
eventually-
it's really interesting that last night I watched the movie Independence Day, and just for a lark, and I kept thinking to myself over and over again, I felt about this for decades, is that the only way this the world is going to get together is if we have a common enemy, like some aliens come from another planet. But I also think that we are now getting to that point where we will have another common enemy again, which is like you said, we're all going to be starving. We're all not going to be able to afford homes. We're not going to be able to afford stuff to cook our food if we have food. And at some point, this plan that these rich people have of making people stupid and independent on them and the way they're doing things, and this
They're hoarding.
unchecked capitalism, it's going to blow up in their faces. I just hope it's going to be sooner rather than later.
Especially if you have kids, man.
Yeah.
Hey,
Cheers to that.
we gotta
Cheers to
wrap
that.
this up, guys.
Kelly, you want to sign us off?
Me?
Sure, thanks for listening, and don't be a dick.
Okay, see you next week.
Bye.